I think something that people need to realize as well is that we've all been swimming in the current of white, cisgender, heterosexual, abled Christian supremacy. And so, like, whether we want to or not, some of that will be internalized. And, it's our journey to really dismantle those things when we come across them.
Hello and welcome to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. We get curious about all things gender, sex, and sexuality, as well as relationships, feminism, the inclusive kind, mental health and kink, and all that makes us humans unique and diverse. From body positivity to body dysmorphia, it's all welcome here. If you like what we do and want to support this podcast, you can become a patron on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/50 Shades of Gender, as in FIFTY. You can also buy us a coffee or make a donation. Links are on the website. You can now register your interest for our upcoming allyship course. Go to 50shadesofgender.com/allyship-course or navigate to the course page via the website menu to be notified when it goes live. Now, join us on a journey of inclusion, acceptance, and respect. I'm your host, Esther Lemons. I am a queer woman, and my pronouns are she and they. In this episode, I have a conversation with Chris TALBOT-HEINDL, an artist and edunomics creator. Chris's pronouns are they and them, and they are transgender, non-binary, asexual, and panromantic. Find out what that means to Chris in this episode. We also talk about how labels can mean something different each day, that the gender binary is a colonial construct, gender fuckery and gender abundance, cultural influences on gender, what allyship is and what it's not, how to take accountability, feeling safe in ourselves, dismantling internalized belief systems, and making space for abundance. Please be aware that there is mention of sexual violence in this episode. It was recorded on the 1st of June 2023. Now let's get into the episode. Hello and welcome. What's your name?
My name is Chris Talbot-HEINDL.
Hello, Chris. Welcome. Um,
Thanks.
yeah, I'm always a bit like, what do we talk about except gender? Let's just get straight into it. So yeah. So
Okay.
I'll ask you about your labels that you gave me. So you gave me transgender, non-binary, asexual, and panromantic, which is great. So yeah, would you like to start with any of those and
Uh,
talk about what it means to you to be those things?
sure. Well, I feel like labels are basically how you just express to people without like diving in. So if I say I'm an introvert, right? Like people generally know what that means, but they don't know if that means like I just don't get energy from people or like I'm a shut in. So like there's this huge broad spectrum and everything. I think the same is true with gender and sexuality identifiers. Like I think it's an easy way to explain who you are, but like what it means to me could differ on the day, you know?
Interesting. Okay.
So, like, being an introvert, some days I'm like, "Ooh, I do wanna go out and hang out with people," but then I need to, like, come home and hide. And other days I'm like, "No, I'm a shut-in today, I definitely am not going out." And I think the same is true for all my identifiers, so they change daily.
That's such a
Um
good point. Yeah, because I can totally relate to the introvert example because I'm definitely one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I would say today, being trans non-binary just means that I'm transgender, so I don't identify as the gender I was assigned at birth. And then non binary, I don't identify within the binary. And like that, like the big umbrella reason, and then there's the day to day reasons. So the big umbrella reason is that the gender binary is a colonial construct. And so I feel like transcending that or not buying into that is actually returning to my roots. And then on the day to day, I've never felt very attached to gender. I've felt very separate from the one I was assigned at birth just because that's the one that everyone assumes I am. So, like, even growing up, if I was mistaken for a little boy, I would be like, ah, yes, I have like ambiguity. That's like powerful. Like, you didn't know, and haha, you were wrong. But like, they weren't wrong. I mean, well, everyone was wrong, I guess. But, I I think of my gender euphoria
Mm-hmm.
space as being a place of gender fuckery,
Mm-hmm.
where people look at you, they have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
That's when I feel like my best. And so, like, from day to day, that might change. I might dress more masculine and wear makeup and earrings, or I might dress more feminine. And like, it's very much this like exploration space and to try and achieve gender fuckery. Which
Yeah.
I know just means nothing, but, like, we could do a whole hour on, like, picking that apart.
Amazing. I like it. Yeah. Let's talk more about gender fuckery.
Okay.
How do you fuck with gender? Other ways to fuck with gender, please.
Oh, yeah, I don't know, it's just this huge thing, so, like, I feel like there's expectation based in that colonial, like, white supremacist construct of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, and, of course, they don't like, that construct doesn't allow for anything in between or beyond or, like, any abundance whatsoever, so you have these prescribed ways of being. Gender fuckery is just, like, not giving two hoots about any of that and just doing whatever
Mm,
comes naturally, whatever feels good in the moment, and just, like, fucking with gender, like,
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, today I'm wearing flannel with like very uh gay pride nails, so like
Nice. I
it's a
like it.
different thing every day, whatever
Yeah.
feels good.
I like that. And I like the word you just used, like abundance. And I was
Mm.
thinking, yeah, gender abundance. I like that in a
Mhm.
way. It feels like contradicting almost, like especially if you don't subscribe to the binary genders, I suppose. But yeah, that's fair enough. So
Yeah.
yeah, so another thing I was going to ask you about was your sort of background, your cultural background. It says in your bio, triracial, which is white, Japanese, and indigenous. And I wondered, what is it like to be trans non-binary in those sort of cultures and in those in those environments?
Yeah. That's a really great question that I don't know.
Okay.
So, kind of my relationship to my cultures is that I came to them in my 20s. So, in my household, we very much lived in the white supremacist culture, like,
Hmm.
so the indigenous parts of my nature were pushed to the side. Japanese culture, except for food, that was the only thing we kept, was pushed to
Hmm.
the side. And so I didn't actually start exploring or understanding any of my cultures other than, and not even like, we talk about white supremacy culture, and what I'm talking about is the amalgamation of everything white. So, like, giving up, I think I am English, Irish, and French Canadian, giving up all of those things for the, like, power of whiteness. I don't know if it's the same in where you are, but, like, in the United States, like, as people from different nations immigrated here, they gave up their culture for the whiteness, which
Right.
protected them and, like, elevated them above everyone else.
Mm.
So that's what I was raised in, was the very much, like, the white suburban Catholic upbringing, and then anything from my cultures were pushed to the side. So, in learning about stuff when I was in my 20s, I learned that, Japan has a different relationship with gender, and then indigenous nations have different relationship with gender. Unfortunately, I don't know my specific nation. So I know that like my family came from the Huron Confederacy, but I don't know which nation from the Confederacy, and every effort to like figure it out has kind of been hit with some roadblocks. And then I stopped looking once COVID started because people had more important things to do, than help me find my nation. So, but if you subscribe to the Pan Indian movement, there's space for abundance of gender and for difference of gender, and then in Japan, it depends on how you look at it, but there used to be, and I'm going to forget what it's called. I actually have a window open so I remember. something called Beautiful Youths, which was like it was kind of gender fuckery. Like people could wear whatever gendered outfits they wanted. They could wear makeup or not wear makeup. They're like having same-sex relationships wasn't a thing. It wasn't considered a thing, so it didn't have a name. You just had relationships. Okay, so that was a thing throughout like the history, but at some point in your life you had to like settle down and marry the opposite gender and have kids, etc. You were expected to like do all that, but there was the concept of beautiful use before that. So,
Oh, interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like if you look at almost every culture in the world, they have that gender fuckery as part of their history until colonization. So, yeah, I forgot what their original question was.
That's okay. Now, I was asking you about, how gender fits into your, like, all your cultural, like,
Oh,
heritage in a way.
right.
So,
So I
yeah.
kinda answered that.
Yeah, yeah, you did. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So I
another yeah, go on.
sorry. Oh, no, I just, like I feel like it's like, even if I can't fully understand my cultures because I wasn't immersed in them growing up, like, it's given me this positive feeling about or connection to that knowing that, I would have been accepted in my cultures had I not been raised in a white supremacist culture. So, I guess that's my personal tie.
Yeah, yeah, that's such a good point. So also, the term two-spirit just comes to mind, and I wondered, what is your relationship to that term, and does it mean anything to you in a particular way?
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly important distinction, which is why I don't take it
Okay.
because I don't know my nation and I don't know if my nation had that experience because it's like beyond gender, it's beyond sexuality. So since I'm not tied to my community, I don't feel like I can own that. Like I think of like an example that people might be more familiar with is like AAVE. So when white folks use AAVE, they think they're communicating what the phrases actually mean, but they don't have any idea of the nuance. So they're just using it in a surface way when the
Interesting.
cultural
What does
uh,
it mean? Sorry, I'm not sure what it means.
African American vernacular English. So like a lot of white folks will use AAVE to communicate something, but they won't understand the nuance and the culture and like everything that's involved in that phrase, but they'll use it because it's like popular internet slang and they think they know what it means. So I feel that same way with like two spirit. Like I don't know the entire weight of that term and I don't live that experience. So I can't use it is how I feel about that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. As we just talked about, like, how did I even find you? We talked about a little book about how to be, a better, like how to be a good trans ally. I should have looked up the title of the book, shouldn't I? Because it's in the other room. But anyway, it's an allyship book when it comes to gender. It's the Beginner's Guide to Being a Trans Ally by Christy Whittlesey. Yeah, allyship, because you're big on education and things like that, aren't you?
Yes.
So where
Mhm.
does where does all this fit in? Like when it comes to education, like what do you find is, I don't know, the most important thing to talk about in your work, and like what is your, from your experience, or is there anything that stands out in particular when it comes to gender or even like intersectionality?
Yeah, yeah. Ooh, that's a hard one. I think the thing I want folks to learn yesterday, so like,
Hmm.
is accountability because I think that would solve so much of the issues we have when we don't live each other's experience.
Hmm.
So, allyship has become kind of this buzzword, I think, where people claim to be an ally when really what they're trying to communicate is that they don't purposefully, intentionally outwardly harm people, and that's not what an
Mm.
ally is. Like, an ally or an accomplice is when you actually sacrifice or potentially sacrifice things like money, time, resources, social capital, or even safety, to ensure that people from an out group have protection. And so, like, when we dilute that word and make it just mean you're not purposefully, intentionally harming,
Mhm.
then what happens is you maybe call someone in for doing something that like harmed you in some way, and they say, "Oh, but I'm an ally." So there's like no
Mm.
accountability. There's no understanding that that may be true, but what you did just had impact, and you have to tend to those impacts. And so, like, I would say the thing I want folks to know the most in their education is how to take accountability. So I have 5 steps that I wanna share from Shaheem McLaurin, and that's 5HAHEM on Instagram. And they, name off the 5 steps, which is number 1, let people speak. So listen to what you did that was harmful and how it was harmful, and don't tone police or try to make it about your feelings or your intentions or anything. Just let people speak. Number 2 is acknowledging what you did wrong. So center the impacts of what you did, again, not your intentions. So your intentions are a separate conversation, or that can remain in your head because it's not really necessary for taking accountability. But if you have a close connection, you want to tell people how, like, what you intended or how you came to what you did. That is a separate conversation. That's not the accountability conversation. So center the impacts of what you did. Number 3 is acknowledge that you are not owed forgiveness. So you should go into that conversation with the intention of repairing harm, not with the intention of being forgiven. So accountability is about being remorseful and tending to that harm. Number 4 is review the lesson that you're taking away. So, what have you learned from causing this harm and listening to the impacts? And then number 5 is to state plans for change. So how do you plan not to cause the same harm in the future? And how do you plan on making repairs? And I think that, like Shaheem says it in their videos, which is like, we don't learn this as children because adults never apologize to us. So we don't have like this
Right?
model.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, we don't have this model. And so learning it now is vitally important. I think also, like, part of that is that we always do the intent, partially because we think that admitting any sort of fault or saying that we did something wrong means that we're a bad person. We don't associate, like, bad actions with good people. So, we have to get out of that mindset first, I think is what it is. So, we have to say, I don't live every experience. So, of course, I'm going to microaggress or cause harm because I'm not thinking about someone else's experience. I haven't experienced it. And it doesn't even have to be like based on identity. Everyone's an individual. So, I could have come across someone with my exact same identity and still harm them because lateral violence is a thing, and I don't know how their identities have impacted their lives. So, something that I might say about myself, like if I say, I'm queer, that could actually cause harm to someone else if I use queer about them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, understanding that because we don't live each other's experience, we will cause harm. And so, when you realize that and you realize that everyone does it, then there's less of that, reactionary, but I'm a good person. It's like, yes, you are, but you just caused harm and we need to tend to those impacts.
Yeah. That's such a good point, actually. Like, it's all about taking responsibility
Mhm.
and, I guess, emotional maturity, isn't it? And I think
Yeah.
it's so. I've just started reading this book actually this morning. It's called Already Enough, and it's by Lisa Oliveira, I think her name is, and she was adopted, and she basically was abandoned by her birth mother, and that she made that just became part of her story and part of her identity. Like, I'm unlovable, I'm not good enough, I'm not enough. How could this
Mhm.
happen? If I was enough, there must be something wrong with me, I'm broken, and it's really interesting when we start unpacking these stories about ourselves and how we learn, to internalize all these things. And it's like, if you think about marginalized people, that is such a big part of their identity. And it's something that we can't, I mean, I'm a white person, so I mean, I can't even imagine what that's like, and yeah, so I think it's just important to, I don't know, yeah, like the listening and stuff. And also, like, I think safety is a big thing, isn't it? Like feeling safe. And also, I think if you're on the receiving end, I think a lot of people might be very reluctant to be like, you know what, I fucked up and I should do better. And, listening. And like you say, because I think so many people don't get beyond step one, do they, of those
No.
steps, because they get defensive.
Mhm.
And I think it's because of our stories and how we've internalized it that we feel unsafe to be like, to be honest and vulnerable about getting it wrong, because we don't want to
Yeah.
be that person, and like, yeah, it's like disconnecting like the person we are, in our identity from this mistake that we've made.
Yep.
And I think it's also to do with like, oh, mistakes are not we're not allowed to make mistakes. I think that is another part of a story for many people, is like, no, it's not, that's not okay, I can't make mistakes, I'm not allowed to make mistakes,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah. I forget who said it, but someone said something that really stuck with me. It's like, do you wanna be right or do you wanna be in right relationship?
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, and, like, it kind of stuck with me because, like, I am a trans, queer, non-binary, mixed race, person of color, all these things, neurodivergent, and I have people in my life who aren't any of those things, and they can't always rectify, I guess, when I call them out. Like, "Are we still friends?" is the most common thing, and it's like, well, if we weren't, then we wouldn't be having this conversation, you know? Like,
Yeah.
yes, you're terribly important to me, and I don't wanna lose you in my life, which is why I'm communicating to you why this hurt me and hoping that you take steps to not do it again. But I've had so many people who can't get past that, initial fear that if they've done something wrong, then I either hate them or I think they're a bad person.
Mm.
And of course, neither of those things is true.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
it has to go both ways. I think we need to be more communicative with people when we call them in and be like, you're important to me in this way and that way and whatever. But I need to let you know that this happened, and I understand that that puts the onus on the harmed party, and so I don't want to do that. But I just want to say, like, if you have the spoons, if you have the energy to like do that sort of reassurance, I think it can get us past this like white supremacist perfectionism
Mm.
faster.
Yeah.
But I also understand like sometimes you just have to be like, ah, you did this and it hurt, and
Mm.
that's fair too.
Yeah, yeah, I think it all depends on what it is and like how hard you poke that bruise, I suppose. Because sometimes, like, if someone taps on it a little bit, then you'll be like, that was not okay. But if someone really pokes it hard, then you're like, oi, fuck off,
Yeah.
It's like, stop doing that, So that's a thing. And
And like how many times it's been poked already that day. That's
yeah,
the other thing. Because it
that is
adds
such a good
up.
point. Yeah,
Like some
yeah.
days, like I have no patience because I've already
Hmm.
been misgendered like 100 times. And so the next person who does it, no matter the relationship with me, I'm like, fuck you.
Yeah, it's gonna get their head bitten off, basically. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And then I,
yeah.
of course, come back and be like, okay, I just had a really bad day. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. But it is true though. I think we are very generally in our society, we're very bad at communicating. And I think sometimes I get a sense of like it's the whole like what's normal and normalized. And it's also a very neurotypical thing, I think. And it just reminds me of this meme, like, what was it? Someone saying, "Oh, look at me, I'm a neurotypical. I just give vague hints about what's going on instead of actually saying what is up," stuff like that. And it's just like, generalizations aside, obviously, but like it really made me laugh because sometimes because I've learned in more recent years, I learned the term neurodivergence, and I was like, oh, something just went bing, and
Mhm.
I was like, oh, this explains a few things about my life. I'm like, oh, and then I kept getting memories of like situations I was in, and thinking, oh, now I understand why that was so hard for me, or
Mhm.
now I understand why I reacted in the way I did, or why I
Mhm.
didn't understand that and why that was so painful. And there's a lot of that going on for me at the moment. I almost feel like this pathway into gender that I had through like meeting my ex partner and everything like that, and then starting this project. I almost feel like any marginalized group of people, when you start opening up to that and you get into it's like a way into this whole like looking at society from the outside, and you
Mhm.
start seeing all these things like
Mhm.
all these systemic issues and misogyny and racism and homophobia and transphobia and ageism and oh, just don't even get me started. So there's just so much going on there. And
Mhm.
once you start seeing it more clearly, you're like, what? Who thought of all this stuff? What the hell is going on? What am I
Yeah.
doing here in this? Yeah, what the hell, basically. Yeah, neurodivergence. Was I going to say anything else about that? Yeah, like communication, I suppose, because we're very bad at communicating honestly and vulnerably and openly. And I think we all need to. It's also with the book I was just talking about. She talked about like really examining your stories, like becoming aware of your stories and then unpacking that and like, is it really true? And also understanding it. Like, why is it part of my why is this my story?
Mhm.
How did this happen? How did this come about? And I think that is just a great way to, start this healing process, I suppose, because I think allyship is really like a personal development. It's a personal development journey, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
Because it
Mhm.
requires you to not just show up for other people, but it also requires you to take a long, hard look in the mirror and be able, or be willing to see things that you really probably won't like, stuff like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And because I think something that people need to realize as well is that we've all been swimming in the current of white, cisgender, heterosexual, abled Christian supremacy. And so, like, whether we want to or not, some of that will be internalized. And, it's our journey to really dismantle those things when we come across them. And so I think it's really important that we don't ignore things. Like, people will be like, oh, I hated that thought that I had. I'm not going to think about it.
La la la
But
la la.
yeah, you have
Yeah.
to like dive in. You have to figure out where did that idea come from?
Hmm.
How does it maybe show up in my life? Am I, actualizing that bias in my everyday life? Are there people that I need to make amends to? How can I dismantle it in the future? Like, all these questions should be coming up when you like have a thought that you are ashamed of and is biased. Because if you just ignore it, then it's going to sit there, it's going to fester, it's going to still be there. You're not going to change your behavior. And that's what's needed. We need people to like notice. We need people to investigate and change behavior. So I would say the biggest thing is just accept that you have these things within you. There's no way you couldn't, because we're all raised in this soup. I know I keep changing metaphors, but we're all raised in it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's gonna like be glomming on. So if you want to think of it as like an illness, you got the flu because you were surrounded by the flu, but now you have to take your flu shot, which is education, which is diving in to biases as they creep up, in like dismantling them, and again doing repair if you know that you've already done actions based on that bias to other people. So
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. So, as you were discovering, as you were on your own gender journey, was there anything that you found, anything internalized that you found and thought, "Whoa, that's a thing."
yeah, yeah, I want to put a little content warning out for folks. I'm going to be talking about sexual violence, a little bit. So, one of the things that I've been dismantling a lot is my history and my relationship to sex. So, I was sexually assaulted many different times and then threatened with corrective rape a couple of times based on my gender identity and sexual orientation. And I, in my 20s, had this feeling that if I didn't like give sex to anyone who wanted it from me, then I was going to be assaulted.
Wow.
And so it kind of created this extreme disconnect between myself and my body, but it also created like, and I'm still like trying to find the words in therapy for this, but
Mhm.
like it also created this like hyper sexualization of myself
Mm.
in my early 20s where I was like trying everything on for size kind of.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um and so it's been this journey of A, having like no respect for myself, but B, realizing the power of a certain body, and sex with that body. Like there's power in that.
Mhm.
But then also, I don't know how to explain it, but like
Mm.
it was this huge thing that I started to unpack like 4 years ago. And then, like a couple years ago, I realized I don't think I've enjoyed sex more than a handful of times. And that led me to like diving deeper. Like, is it because I'm trans and I don't feel attached to my body? Or is it because of the sexual assault and I don't feel attached to my body? Or am I like legitimately asexual
Mm.
and it just was never going to be a thing? Um,
Yeah.
and like, I ultimately decided it doesn't matter, like, what the reason.
Mhm.
The result is the same. I have a disconnect with my downstairs, and I just don't enjoy sex.
Mhm.
So I feel like I don't remember the the original question. This is what happens every time.
That's fine. I think what I asked was it had to do with what did you find anything internalized in yourself as you went about your gender exploration or your own gender
Gotcha.
journey? Yeah.
Yes. Okay,
Hmm.
so where I was going with that
Yeah.
is that in my 20s when I was doing that exploration,
Hmm.
I was raised Roman Catholic, and that was, of course, related to colonization. um, so it was like a colonized religion in at least three of my ethnicities. And it has a very, from the way that I was taught the faith, and I understand that there are different ways of learning it and different, like, sects and everything. Sects, like SECTS. But the way I learned it was sex is shameful. Sex is something that only happens between a man and a woman, and sex is something you wait for marriage for.
Hmm.
And so I had all these like misogynistic viewpoints that I didn't realize were there. Like I rejected my Catholic upbringing when I was 14. I actually got kicked out of CCD for suggesting that the story of Jezebel wasn't, well, okay, my CCD teacher taught me that the story of Jezebel, the meaning of it was that girls shouldn't wear short skirts and makeup, otherwise they're asking for it. And of course, I disagreed as a survivor. And so I had choice words and I got myself kicked out.
Oh my God, there's just yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like sometimes faith can be uplifting, and in my experience, faith can be very harmful. But I didn't realize I had held on to some of those things that I had been swimming in, since
It
birth.
sticks to you, doesn't it?
It
That's some
does.
sticky stuff. Yeah.
And so I had so many misogynistic thoughts, which I'm thankful I didn't like. I internalized for myself and myself only, so I'm very thankful for that at least.
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't know how it happened, but I didn't, like, put it on other folks, like, in my
Mhm.
head, which was very helpful, but
Mhm.
once in a while, like, I'd have those thoughts, of other people, like,
Yeah.
"Oh, she shouldn't have worn that outfit," or, "Oh, this and that and the other,"
Mhm.
and so it is something that whether or not you want it, it's gonna be internalized, and you need to dismantle it for your own well-being as well as
Yeah.
others.
Mm. Yeah, totally. I found some misogyny inside myself as well.
Mhm.
And I find it's interesting because one of the things I find is feelings of it's not just finding those things, it's about it just blows everything up, it just
Yeah.
turns your life upside down a bit really. And
Mhm.
and then you have to also deal with like hindsight and
Yeah.
how you've lived your life and how different it could have been and
Yep.
anger and grief and a lot of stuff, there's a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah, I'm sure
Yeah.
yeah. you know
I think the grief is the most, like, pivotal one. I don't know, I had shame a lot. So,
yeah,
like, in
there's
my
that.
20s when I was trying to explore and trying to, like, find, like, a positive feeling about sex, there was so much shame. And then it like, afterwards, it was grief because, like, what if the reason why I didn't enjoy sex was because I had so much shame attached to it that I didn't allow myself to? Because I purposely picked a couple of partners that I knew I was, like, 120% safe, and, like, there could be exploration without any sort of, like, fear, you know? Like, one of them, like, bless him. He got me through a lot of, like, built up pain, I guess, from, like, the multiple sexual assaults. That was, like, the one like I said, there were a couple of times I actually enjoyed sex. That was one of those times was with him, and it was like I don't know how to describe it, but just, like, the grief of realizing that maybe it wasn't intrinsic. Maybe it was because of experience, and, like, maybe
Mm.
I could have had, like, a beautiful, like, sexual life if, like, I had, like, an ongoing relationship with this person who eventually left my life. I don't know, there's that grief of, like, what you could have been,
Mhm. Yeah.
but, like, I'm unwrapping in therapy, like, yeah, and, like, yeah, it could have been a certain way, and what are you gonna do about it now? So,
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it could have been many ways, couldn't it?
yeah.
But
Mhm.
also no, because this is this is where you're at and this is the life
Mhm.
you have or have lived up to now. And the next choice you make can take you in a different direction and yeah, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, yeah. I like how this conversation has meandered into I wasn't really sure what to I mean, I had a few questions in my head, but then also we've touched on some unexpected things. So, yeah,
Mostly because I can't, like, talk in a straight line, it's like,
it's a
"Woo!"
nonlinear thing. It's like that's what nonlinear brains do. So, yeah, I think. Yeah. So is it only in the last few years that you've started on your own gender exploration journey?
No, so I didn't have words for my journey early on, but I started going by Chris when I was 5, and I demanded that no one call me anything else. I kind of started my clothing expression when I was around 10. That's, when I first shaved my head too. But I honestly, growing up, I thought I was an alien. I thought, like, you know, some my alien parents, like, left me on the planet or something, and they're gonna come back for me.
How interesting. How that I
Yeah.
find it interesting how that links into the book I start reading about the woman who was adopted. It's like, "Oh
Oh!
my god, yeah. Wow, yeah.
Yeah, so, like,
Yeah.
I was convinced that I only had a small time on this planet, and eventually my alien parents would come get me. I blame the books I was reading at the time, but
Yeah.
um, but yeah, so when I was 19, I finally heard trans for the first time. So I had never heard the word trans. I didn't know what it meant. I just knew that I was different from anyone I knew and like I didn't feel like I fit in and I thought that in like I really thought that gender was a real thing and not a social construct. So it's like how can I not belong in like any like either of these genders? Like that doesn't make any sense. I must not be I
Mm.
must be wrong or I must be from a different planet. And then when I was 19, I was in college at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, and we took a bus to what we affectionately called the Big Gay Conference. I honestly can't remember the name of it for real because it was like this really long acronym.
Yeah.
So the Big Gay Conference works. And at the conference, they held the first ever transgender monologues. So, kind of in the spirit of vagina monologues, but
Mhm.
people were asked to talk about their transgender experience. And I just remember this woman got up to the mic and she said, "I'm 51 years old and I have a 1-day old vagina." And
Wow.
she talked about her gender experience and then after that it was like one person after the other talking about their gender experience and I was like, "Oh my god."
Mm.
I'm not an alien. I'm not like wrong. I'm just trans. And it was just mind blowing and just really affirming to hear that for the first time. This was like 2001. And
Wow,
like
yeah.
hearing that, I was just like, okay, now I can relax. Now I know what's going on, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
And so I thought I was a trans man at first because I still didn't know about non-binary,
Mhm,
and I remembered how I would get elated whenever someone would, think I was a boy
mhm.
because at least they didn't think I was a girl,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
so I thought I was a trans man. I was gonna go on hormones and transition at that point, but I had a medical condition and couldn't go on hormones. But I tried to transition socially and use Z-Them pronouns but most of the people in my life kinda just laughed in my face and thought it was, like, a fad or,
Mm,
a phase or something and kinda refused. So, I ended up actually, like, kind of going back in the closet, like, my relationships with, like, lovers, they knew, because I couldn't, like, not bring that into a discussion, but for
mhm,
the most part, no one else knew. And then when I moved to Denver and out of Wisconsin, it was safe to like be out and it also wasn't weird. So I came out when I moved here and I've just been on this like accelerated gender journey since moving to Denver where it was safe.
mm. Wow, yeah. Again, the safety factor, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so when did you find that it's interesting when you said you thought you were a trans man for a while, and what happened to make you realize that that wasn't quite it?
I heard the term
That's
non-binary.
when you
It's
had yeah.
really just about knowing the thing
Mm,
to realize you fit the thing. Like and like I'm open to the fact that maybe I won't feel like I'm non-binary once I find another term that like maybe fits me better.
yeah.
So I think that's part of the journey too is like you peel one layer of the onion and then you're like, "Oh, hey, there's these other things." And then you peel that and you're like, "Oh, hey." So
Yeah.
it's just like an ongoing like what fits, you know?
Mhm.
So yeah, I think when I heard non-binary, I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's the
Ding.
one."
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Gosh, we haven't even gotten to asexual and panromantic. So, oh well, you've covered the asexual. You've touched on that anyway.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. Well, actually, panromantic. How does that fit in?
Okay. So panromantic, and I don't know. I don't know if my definition would like match other
Mhm.
people's. This is again where it becomes very
Yeah,
individual.
yeah.
but I have attraction to and I want to be close to people of all genders.
Mhm.
Is what that means to me. The level of which depends on the gender,
Mhm.
which is maybe individual for me, but
Interesting. Yeah.
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 So, like, for me, I think it's because of the sexual violence, but I
Mhm.
do not, like, feel I feel like I'm, like, romantic with walls, with, cisgender men specifically, my spouse excluded. So he's very understanding of, like, all everything about me and
Mhm.
knows everything, so,
Mhm.
like, I feel like a romantic attachment to him, but usually for, cisgender men, I feel, like, romantic towards, but with a wall. Like, there's
Mm.
definitely, like, that level of, "I need safety, I need this protection here for my own well-being." But yeah, that's kinda generally
Mhm.
how that shows up for me.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Wow. So I was just looking at the time. It's really flown by. So I was just wondering, like, before we wrap up, I'm sure we could talk for many hours more, but like, I was just wondering if there's anything that you would like to say that we haven't talked about yet.
Mm. Yeah, actually, I don't know what the holiday scheme is over where you're at, but right now is the first month of Pride,
Hmm.
or the first day of the month of Pride
Yeah.
in the United States. And I just want to encourage people, like all people, regardless of your gender identity or sexual orientation, to be abundant this month. It makes space for abundance. I feel like over the course of the last, I don't know, 20 years or so, I feel like there's been this like respectability politic enforced on pride events where we're trying to mainstream or something. And so we try to hide people who are the most different from cisgender heterosexual supremacy. And those folks tend to be the most vulnerable of our community. So I would ask people to not do that this year. Like, make space for abundance. Yeah, just like accept everyone and don't try to force like this respectability politic on folks that don't fit the cisgender heterosexual norms.
I like that use of the word abundance, actually. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, it's my favorite. I overused it probably.
Yeah, no, I think it should encompass all those things, because there is abundance in so much more than I think sometimes people think, oh, it's wealth, is abundance. And it's like, but it's so much more than that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing all you've shared, Chris.
Yeah, thank you.
You can find out more details on the website at 50shadesofgender.com/Chris-th, where you can also read the transcript. And you can find Chris on their website, talbot-heindl.com, which is TALBOT-HEINDL, and on Twitter at Talbot_Heindl. Links are on the episode page. Thank you for listening to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. You can find us online at 50shadesofgender.com, on social media, and on YouTube. Again, if you'd like to support us, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/50 Shades of Gender. You can also buy us a coffee or make a donation. Links are on the website. Remember to register your interest for our upcoming allyship course. Go to 50shadesofgender.com/allyship-course or navigate to the course page via the website menu to be notified when it goes live. We hope you will listen again. Until then, stay curious and open-minded.
Like, I like to can we swear on this podcast?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Just checking.